Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Cocuzzi, owner of LC Business Innovations, and I'm here with a very special guest today, Sandra Lisi, Vice President of Supplier Engagement with Kinetic GPO. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, as a business owner and somebody who owns a consulting practice, also a wellness business owner, one of the things that has really resonated throughout my career and an important topic we want to discuss today is around building supplier relationships, particularly in organizations such as governments. Having spent over 20 plus years working with a number of different government organizations, this particular topic has resonated through and through, and I've seen significant changes in the approach to working with suppliers, but more so wanted to bring Sandra here today, who represents one of Canada's group purchasing organizations and spearheads the supplier development and relationship area. So what are your thoughts, Sandra, on this important topic that we have seen evolve throughout our careers?
We have, and having come from the private sector, where the last leg of my career in private was strategic sourcing and supplier management, I saw the disciplines that were applied in the private sector that were constantly evolving and changing, and then making the move from the private sector into the public sector, where there was a significant absence of supplier management in the true sense of it and the disciplines that surround it. Was a little bit of an eye-opener for me because we both know, having spent years in both public and private sectors, there are advantages and disadvantages. So I think it's a very critical topic. I think going into a new year in particular, that there are things and nuggets of wisdom that between the two of us we can share today that can help our audience along.
Absolutely. No, great points. And as somebody who has primarily worked in the public sector most of my career and now manages a consulting practice where, working one-on-one with government organizations and non-for-profits on project management, procurement, supply chain approaches, risk management, you name it, this is an area that I see oftentimes organizations are not taking advantage of actually how do we engage, with our suppliers in the most advantageous way, but without necessarily rocking the boat on the compliancy requirements and many of the legislation pieces that we're bound to, especially in working with government organizations. I can tell you a very, very quick anecdote. When I first started my career in the public sector, one of the first things that actually was said to me is that, well, you generally do not speak to your, suppliers, your vendors, unless it's dealing with acquiring certain, award information or you're conducting a site visit or things like that. So there was definitely a perception around there very early on of shielding, right? It's the, concept of risk management, risk mitigation, about not wanting to be perceived, right, as having potentially sharing more information or receiving more information.
Or biases.
Or biases, exactly. So this is something that when I first started in my career was very prevalent, but as I've moved and worked in various roles and business lines, and now being on the consulting side, working within organizations, this is an area that I'm seeing some starting to do really well and others that are starting to still continue to struggle. And we're seeing the effects of this because it directly has an impact on understanding the buying organization and ensuring that what they're asking for in the marketplace is sound, is reasonable, right? And it can be met from the supplier community. So what are your thoughts on
Absolutely. I think it's critical. We're going into, the next year with more demands on our suppliers, more demands that are not only environmental but political. There's pressures everywhere. So I think it's important that organizations that are they're going through the journey of supplier management and have started it to some degree, really start to look at how they can leverage these relationships to look at innovation in delivery of products and services. Those that are just starting or haven't started the journey yet, I would, strongly encourage them to start putting frameworks in place because the benefits of having a supplier management program outweigh not having one in the absence of one. I can share with you from the public sector, in particular if you're in a large organization with many divisions and thousands of contracts, even hundreds of contracts, the struggle becomes who owns that supplier. How do we manage that supplier? What are we managing them to? Is it the contract? Are we establishing KPIs? Either way, whatever you choose to structure your program around, it's important that you have something. And to your point, the myth of I'm not allowed to speak to suppliers, it was very similar in my public sector experience. No, we can't talk to them. We cannot be seen speaking with them because there's this perception that we are favoring one supplier over another. And so to maintain that neutral playing field, it was a do not speak with anyone. But you do raise a good point, something that we really need to start thinking about is how do we engage the supplier proponent marketplace prior to issuing a competitive solicitation to the market. And I think we'll touch on a few tools that you and I have both leveraged in our career where you're not compromising the integrity of the process, nor are you exposing your organization to any unnecessary risk. So I think we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, absolutely, there's an absence of it. And in a national role, like my current role with Kinetic GPO, I deal with public sector entities nationally across all different verticals, including healthcare, education. And I see supplier management stronger in some verticals than other, while still part of the public sector, but I still see tons of room for improvement and growth in those.
Awesome. No, some great points there. One of the things that I have found, and I've seen this in various kind of waves that have happened over the last, several years, has been around what I often hear from suppliers, and this is more so especially the last couple years, but this has been around for a number of years. It's around the topic of risk transference. So as a government organization, this is the topic that we're dealing with here. So oftentimes, working one-on-one with clients, having been an internal client myself within organizations, one of the things that we're assessing is the ability for our suppliers to be able to deliver on what we're asking and doing so in a way that achieves our budget, our requirements. There's a number of priorities that an organization will have. But one of the things I'm starting to see more and more is that risk transference, meaning that certain deliverables, certain risks are being passed off to the supplier to figure out and to manage. And oftentimes not with a lot of parameters or guidance, right, in that. And this is something that as procurement professionals that we coach our internal staff and teams with, but also this is important for suppliers to be able to tell us before we're going out with a solicitation document. If you're thinking about going down this road, these are the challenges that you may be encountering. What are your thoughts on that?
I have an example from, I want to say, the tail end of 24, where this exact thing happened. And it happened as a result of that lack of upfront supplier engagement. Okay. And it was a misunderstanding of the deliverables. And what that ended up resulting in was significant change orders, delays in delivery. And we're talking about something in the healthcare vertical where you have patients that could be impacted, as an example. And so it's really important. And to our earlier point, when you're looking to build supplier relationships and supplier engagement, which is what I do full-time now, is to be able to have those non-detailed conversations. We're not talking scope details to the line item,
right?
But we're talking about overall governance, overall structure, kind of like the rules of engagement. Here's what I'm expecting. Here's what you should be expecting. And so having those open lines of communication, in my opinion and my experience, have really helped the contract flow smoothly, the work to be delivered. There's never, rarely there's a perfect execution, but you'll be able to execute with as minimal interruptions, or the hiccups become manageable.
For sure, yes. There's a recent example as well too, where I was conducting a series of supplier engagement, and we want to focus on different topics, not down to the minuscule line item of a requirement. But one of the things about just in terms of what is happening in terms of actually labor in the marketplace, and it was interesting when you open up that dialogue to the suppliers and say, "Can you walk me through what are you seeing in terms of labor on your side, your sub trades and channel, and then there's information that comes back to say, hey, by the way, there's some major negotiations going on with certain trade unions right now that could jeopardize delivery on this, or in the case of what we've been dealing with this whole year in terms of import exports, with our trading partner, south of us, just challenges around like, look, we're going to have some bottlenecks here. We're going to be dealing with significant price escalation that we're anticipating. But here's how we're trying to contingency manage this, working, timelines and things like that. So we're hearing that just, again, to build that awareness around risk management, because at the end of the day, the customers that we're supporting, right, have to be able to align their work with their budgets and scope, et cetera.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add to that because you raise a really good point, especially when you're looking at multi-year agreements. And for the delivery of services, for example, and I'll talk construction for a moment. There are labor shortages across the country. There are skilled labor shortages. And so when you're looking to go out for procurement on a multi-year award, on a construction project, for example, and, you don't really ask, or you could be asking, what is your labor retention strategy? What is your hiring process? What does that pipeline look like? And I only mention this because there's nothing worse than a proponent bidding on a job, knowing that they don't have the resources, or they have an idea of a plan that they'll put in place. But as the entity, I need to be confident that that supplier is going to deliver. So one, having those upfront conversations, and it could be through market sounding exercises, for example, where you're asking the same question in a very generic way, not job specific, but what are your, labor retention plans, et cetera.
Right.
And so that you can be more informed when you're building your RFP, and then ultimately you have that supplier relationship that you'll be developing to be able to monitor and help them manage that.
Okay. No, that's great points. Awesome. And, we talked about, we wanted to introduce some of the tips and tricks of what we've been seeing as well, working with different size organizations and things that have worked well, maybe things that haven't. One of the things, I just wanted to bring this topic to kind of to the stage here. One of the things I've seen with certain organizations, again, government-focused, has been the introduction of a vendor performance management or supplier performance management program. Different scale of it, different approaches, maybe working with some of your high-spend commodities or high-risk commodities. Others have implemented across the board for every type of commodity that they acquire. What are your thoughts on these types of programs?
I think these programs are very important for a few different reasons. Number one, when you're executing an agreement with a supplier, that's the basis of your relationship going forward. That outlines in black and white what is required, what the deliverables are, and the timelines, et cetera. But what isn't on paper and needs to be built is that dialogue and relationship. So suppliers should know that they're being evaluated. They should know what they're being evaluated on and what is going to happen with that information. So are those things that you're going to bring up at a quarterly business review, an annual business review? What are your expectations if there are issues that arise? And it's really about developing a partnership with that supplier. That is key. And I say that because there's this old mentality of they're the supplier, they just have to do what we've told them to do, and here's what we expect.
Right.
And I think over the last 7 years, when the world has changed, we have had to depend on suppliers and ask them to come
100%.
through for us in times where we were in a jam.
Yes.
We being collective globally we're in a jam.
Yes. Yeah.
So think about it. If you have great supplier relationships that you have built with your community, how willing are they going to be to help you?
100%.
Right?
Yes.
Versus hammering them constantly, hammering, nickel and diming them to the last penny where they have no wiggle room.
Or incentive.
Exactly. How willing are they going to be to help you?
Right.
So managing them to the performance isn't about you passed and failed. It's about a partnership.
Right.
And so once the expectations are laid out and the supplier understands what is expected, and the entity also has accountability in that as well to the organization to manage, then I think there's minimal surprises, or there shouldn't be any, because they know what to expect.
And it's the same principle even when we do staff performance appraisals. It should never be at the end of the year or whenever you complete the fiscal year or whenever the performance management programs are kind of concluding that, oh, it's a surprise that, your performance has been below par. Same thing with the supplier performance. There should be indicators along the way, and I've seen that work really well in some organizations because there are those gating points to have those conversations from the contract owner to the supplier, or if it's the procurement representative, whomever, to say, listen, this is where, maybe performance is really doing well versus, areas that may not be. And I've even seen in some cases where those suppliers are your top, your A suppliers, B suppliers, whatever the case is, whatever classifications you're using, the suppliers that are actually your key anchors that help deliver a lot of your services and products, the ones that actually, those organizations that have built those relationships will invite them to have webinars about, the industry, the topics, challenges that they're finding. And you start to see that more like that momentum in terms of working together, sharing that information across the industry as well, right? So I do feel like, as somebody who's managed a very large vendor management program years in the making, it's something that can work extremely well. But the also flip side to that we often see is a challenge with capacity, right, to manage. This is another area that I've seen organizations struggle, because when you have to make business cases or advocate for staffing for, let's say, a team or that role position to manage suppliers, it's often one that I find goes to the bottom of the list, right? And it's oftentimes perceived as very hard to justify. How do we measure the tangible KPIs out of this? But equally, it is an area, especially when you have millions or even billions of dollars going to different categories of suppliers. What are your thoughts on that?
No, absolutely. I think that initially it may be something that requires entity investment in resourcing. However, there are tools that can be leveraged to help with that so that you're not constantly dependent on human resources to be able to execute these programs. There's software tools that are available to assist. And also, depending on the category and the commodity, it's not something that has to be managed on a daily basis.
Right.
You could look at the frequency of that, and it's not a one-size-fits-all to your earlier point.
Yes, yeah.
You're not going to manage a high complex, a technology partner that has all of the infrastructure within your organization will be managed very differently than, for example, the office supplies.
Right.
There's two different categories of management, or construction. So you have to look at what is it that you're looking to measure, and what are the outcomes that you're looking to achieve with that category. So construction could be very different. In particular, you could look at a project-based assessment, and that's done. It's almost like a lessons learned. Right?
Yeah.
And so you do that at the end of every project, and that's done together collectively of what we've done well, what we could improve on, and then there's action plans that come out of that. But I think that in some way, shape, or form, going into the next decade, it is going to be even more important that you have relationships and understand how your supplier operates and allow them to bring innovative ideas. Maybe not new products and services, that would be out of scope of the original contract.
Right.
However, different ways to deliver.
Delivering the customer support, right? How do we deal with risk management or, escalation issues? Like, this has been some of the areas I've seen as well, where, if suppliers are at their table during the market sounding to say, here are some of the internal processes or things that we hold very strongly to our own culture, and something that we'd be sharing with our customers. Right? And that's part of the innovation piece, right? It's not just the end product or service, but it's also how that supplier is structured to run.
Absolutely.
So just kind of moving forward, because I know we have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we leave our audience with some really good tidbits of takeaways. So if a government organization were to ask, okay, what would be like maybe the top 3 takeaways in terms of building a supplier relationship approach and program within their organization, what would be some of the top 3 things you would want to leave with them?
Well, I think to some extent, most organizations that deal with suppliers already have a foundation to start with. But the first thing I would do is to understand what contracts you have in place, what the term of that agreement is, almost like a profile on that supplier. And you would want to capture things like the number of agreements you have in place with them, how long they've been a supplier, how long is the term of their agreement, what are the products and services they deliver, and what internal departments or divisions are using that supplier, because it's important, because you'll want to and need to get feedback from many. The second piece, and I encourage you to be a champion in your organization and almost have the guts to bring this forward. I know it's extra work, but it's something that is so needed, is to put together a skeleton of what this would look like for your company and pick one category. It's overwhelming if you start looking at technology and, facilities and construction. Pick one and do that as a pilot. Create what's important for you to understand in that supplier relationship. I'll give you an example, if it's janitorial products, what's important? That the products arrive on time, they get delivered to the right location, et cetera, et cetera. And run that as a pilot before you start to become overwhelmed with doing a mass rollout. And then the third thing I would do is find a champion within a division that also works with suppliers to help you on this journey. And you may want to connect with a supplier that you're already using and saying, I need you to be part of this experiment that we're going to do, and here's what we're going to be looking at. Could you give us some feedback from a supplier lens? Start small.
Fantastic. And that's usually where, to get that buy-in, that's key. We often use the term, piloting, right? Because you want to set those, just see how things are going. Let's set some KPIs around this. Let's see how we can actually do this. And that will give you the evidence. Oftentimes when I've had to bring business cases forward, we've done it through a pilot. We have the data and the input to kind of substantiate what we're asking for. And I would also say, to your pieces of advice, it is, I think, fundamental, especially when we're in marketplaces where we are dealing with a lot of complexity, a lot of changing environments, changes in supply and production, cost variations. We're seeing this a lot now. It is imperative, I think, for government organizations, especially on the procurement side, before you go out to market, please do some market sounding. And this is not just scaling, the marketplace for comparable documents. That's, that's an example for market research, but actually conducting and hosting supplier discussions. Have an agenda that's set and categorized based on common topics that can be asked across the board. We do this very commonly in facilities management type procurements, and look at that from, okay, what are we seeing as, like we talked about innovation? What are suppliers doing to help build innovation within your own capacity, your own company? ESG, what policies, procedures, things like that do you have in place? What are some of the lessons learned you have experienced as a supplier in working with these types of sectors of clients, right? Things like that. I think it's so fundamental, because that will save so much time and challenges down the road when, a government organization has specified certain things that are just not achievable and are going to be cushioned with additional cost, contingency, right? And then we know where that leads.
And that takes me I just wanted to add a couple things. Market sounding was something that in my municipal experience, we did not do that often in the private sector where I worked, but in the public sector, we did that many, many times across multiple categories. I can tell you we've done it parks, forestry, recreation. We've done it within construction, transportation, facilities, key areas and large spend and technology across any organization. And I think it really helped inform us, in some cases, how to go out to market. It helped us understand also, just little nugget of side information, why maybe smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses are not bidding on your work, and you're seeing the same pool of suppliers that continuously bid on your procurements.
Right.
So these market soundings are really intel gathering, and I encourage them strongly. The last thing I wanted to just add is when you're looking at the tail end of it and going into the supplier management, lowest price is not always the best deal. You will find that managing a supplier that has done nothing but give you the lowest price is going to be a lot more in most cases.
Yes.
Because of the change orders and managing that and ensuring that those are compliant, than you would in a fair, open negotiation with a supplier that is willing to be a partner That's a key thing. Willing to be a partner through the life cycle of that contract. You could be 3, 5, 10 years, depending on the category.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
So-
and many of our contracts that we run are often, fixed term and optional years. So it's very
Exactly.
common to see some of these agreements go well and beyond 5 years.
It's like a relationship. You want to build,
100%.
you want to set the ground rules from the beginning.
It's a marriage, right?
It
you
is.
You want it to work out to the best.
It is a marriage for a set period of time.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well, I'd like to conclude. We've had a great discussion this afternoon. I know this is a hot topic and it's something that we can continue on, but we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to share with the audience some of our findings and tips. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Sandra, for being here this afternoon.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I love this topic and happy to do a part 2 and dive deeper into the details. But thank you for having me. I hope that our audience finds the information insightful and helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
Thank you.